Welcome to Friends, Life, and Ministry. Real talk from four pastors with over 200 years of ministry experience.
Hey, welcome to Friends, Life, and Ministry. The four of us are friends. The four of us have a lot of ministry experience. We've been through a lot of hard knocks and let's see, 50, over 200 years of ministry experience
And
around.
all in the 70s.
Yep. So today we want to start a talk on a topic that I think a lot of you will be interested in hearing, and that's if we're going to try to talk about what we wish we had known um, as a hardship, as a difficulty, as a challenge, surprises when we were starting ministry. And each of us, I think, have mentioned profound things. So I'm going to start with my brother Steve. And as we were prepping for this, it's so insightful, the issue that Steve raises. And would you talk to us about that, Steve?
Yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin, and I thought I understood English. And from my perspective, I was a pretty normal person. And so I think everyone always looks at life through their own eyes and receives things in a particular way, and then they assume that other people receive things the same way. Um, I've been very fortunate through the years to be surrounded by very kind people in ministry. Who attended the church and those who also worked with me in ministry. One of the big surprises for me was when I was very young and I would give a sermon. People would end up responding favorably for the most part, especially when a church is small. They don't get real picky because they love you so much. Church planting is wonderful because of the relationships. As the churches got larger and larger, um, I would have people who really were close to me come to me and say, Steve, I think that you could improve your speaking a little bit if you were more like this. And but they always used, rather than being specific, they'd use the word deep. You weren't deep. And after three or four people told me that, I started to hate the word deep. And I thought I understood what the word deep meant. And I approach things kind of from a philosophical standpoint where I want everything to all unfold together and make sense long term. And so I would get deeper in my philosophical approach, and then I would hear back from my friends, "You were worse this week." And, at this point, the church has gotten to be hundreds and hundreds of people, and these people again loved me, and they wanted me to be more effective, and so I ended up being inspired to ask them to define what deep meant. And over the years, um, people who loved me would come up and tell me that I wasn't deep, and I would then ask them to define what that meant to them. And I ended up recording on a piece of paper, I think 10 or 12 different ways that I wasn't being deep. And there's no way that you could be all of those things at the same time. And you still needed to be kind of true to yourself, but you needed to be aware of how different people respond. For example, if if I didn't mention somewhere that I had prayed over what I was going to be teaching and that I really felt spirit directed in order to share this message, there were a certain percentage of people who pretty much discounted the whole message because I wasn't being led by the Spirit. There were other people who were very interested in academic things, and if I didn't quote the context of a particular Greek verb, then I wasn't going deep enough. Now, very, very different approaches. There were some that if I didn't show emotion, I often showed emotion, but if I didn't, then they would feel as if it wasn't a sincere enough message that I was trying to give. And with other people, they wanted to know more about history and how everything fit in. With others, if there wasn't a altar call at the end of the service, then I wasn't being deeply evangelistic. Now, those are just some of my 15. We had a woman in our church named Lori Carroll who had a PhD in communication and taught at the local university. She is now the wonderful chancellor of the University of Minnesota in Rochester, Minnesota. And I worked with her. We actually started a couple of little things to try to help teach other people, pastors, to be more effective speaking. And I brought her all of this data, and she looked at me and she said, "It doesn't surprise me at all." She said, "Because we all have different receptor points, and we all think we're normal." So she said, there isn't any way that one message can be all things to all people because we all have these different receptor points. So I gave her the material. I asked her if she could do an academic study, and hopefully someday when she has time, she will go ahead and explore. But she was always so kind, and she just talked about the power of the words that we speak. And I think that the average pastor has one or two on this list that they are just especially gifted in. And then the others, I think that it would be helpful for them to be aware within their congregation that if they tried to focus on one or two each week, just as much as it would be, of course, we should let people know that we have prayed for and we felt spirit led. Those are things that sometimes open a person's heart and we just are making assumptions. And so I had an opportunity to teach preaching, and I just shared all of my failings with all of these not being deep. And
Well,
it's interesting.
I'm gonna have you pause there for a
Sure.
second. I've listened to Steve preach on many occasions, and he is an exceptional speaker. He'd be on a bell curve
Yeah.
in the top 3, 5%. Um, so
And for me, he's probably about the best storyteller I've ever heard in a sermon.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Bill and John, what are your reactions to that? And were you aware of that going into ministry? Have you had some experience with that? How have you helped coach people when they face that kind of critique?
Go ahead, John.
I never thought I would be a pastor. I never chose the profession as a pastor. I always chose the calling as a pastor. And I think that makes quite a big difference in how you then also enter the ministry and what kind of expectations you allow yourself to have, but also how you would interpret people's interpretations. I mean, for me, it was a little bit easy. Like, okay, there's no one else. I'm here. You have to do it with me. And if you don't want that, I can help you to find another church that might meet your needs more. But this is it. Very simple.
How about for you, Bill?
For me, I'd say it was interesting because when I started in smaller churches, my first church had 60 people. When I started, my second church had 85. And the issues you would have would be with the people in the church. But as the church got larger, and I started like in my third church, we had about 5 people on staff. And then my church in California, we had 15 pastors. Uh, Altogether in the staff, there were like 50 people, but 15 pastors. And I have a different background. My dad was a pastor, my grandfathers were pastors, my uncles were pastors, my cousins were pastors. So I had a unique preparation. And I was always surprised when we would hire a pastor. They were so excited about coming and working at the church. and they wanted the job and they had the qualifications, but invariably, on a daily basis, the problems that I dealt with as the senior pastor were almost all from the staff, and the staff causing problems with people in the church or causing problems with each other. And I was not prepared for that at all. And so I began to talk a lot about uh, I don't want to have any surprises. So if you have a run-in with somebody, or if you mess up on something, I want you to tell me, because I don't want any surprises. I want to be able to be prepared to deal with it. And even with that, I had to constantly be saying that, because they just would be embarrassed about a mistake they made, and they just want to cover it up, and that never worked. So I think that was one of the biggest surprises to me, was at a smaller church, how people can cause so many problems with each other. But then when you get into a larger church, it's actually the staff that are that way.
That's so interesting. Steve or John, reactions to John, to what Bill said?
No, I think you should first talk. You have been pastoring a church with many pastors and leaders. Why would you spin
Well,
off on?
why don't you guys, I asked you to talk, so you guys talk.
Um, let me share that it is really difficult when when you're. I'm just going to share from my context. Starting a church, we had about 25 people as a core group. The church now has about 2,000 people. Well, I'm gonna guess at least 1,500 people each week. I'm not a part of that anymore. In the orbit of the church, there's probably 3,000. We just went back for their 40th anniversary, and there were a couple thousand people that attended. Um, when the church reached a place where I could no longer do everything, because as a church planter, my wife and I, we did all the leadership things. There wasn't money to hire anybody else. So when we no longer could do whatever it was, then we went out to try to find somebody. And and that was supposed to relieve some of the stress that I had. And there were a couple of seasons that, just like Bill talked about, these people who I hired, that I loved, that I poured into, they were making more work for me than if I didn't have them, and I just took over their duties. And sometimes I think churches, as they become wealthier, they might spend too much money focusing on staff rather than, and this is just my mind, um, spending the time managing those people. I would rather give it to seeing new churches started, and keep as small of a staff as you possibly can, so that they know your heart and you know their heart. Now, that's just me. I never was meant to be, I think, a large church pastor. I'm more of a shepherd, where I like to care for people and know their names. But you know, Bill, that had to have been just so frustrating, because each of them were really hired to help you and make your life easier.
My cousin was one of the founders of Willow Creek Community Church. And one of her frustrations was that when they were starting the church, they were passionate. They were going door to door selling tomatoes to be able to have enough money just to rent a place to meet.
Right.
And then over the years, as the church grew, people wanted to come and work there. And she said that the people are just not passionate like we were. We cannot find people. And you guys saw that as church planters. You were passionate about it. All three of you were. And it's hard to find people who have that passion. Would you agree with that, Paul?
Yeah, I think that's really a challenge. And it's frustrating if you are a person of passion and people don't present that way.
Hmm.
I think the I think on the unique thing about being a pastor that we all have to remember is we work with sinful people
Yeah.
who by nature are sinful.
And
And
of course,
even though,
we're sinners as well. Yeah.
yeah, and we're sinful people.
Yeah.
And there's some areas where we're redeemed and or we're redeemed, but there's some areas where the new creation is starting to show, but it's not completely showing. And so every person you meet, you have to go, this person is going to fail me, and I'm going to fail this person. And that's true of staff, that's true of attenders. That's true when attenders give you advice about speaking. But that's true with medical doctors. If you go to a medical doctor, they'll tell you their patients will come in and go, well, what do you think about these alternative therapies? And they'll bring up something, and the doctor goes, I did 12 years of education to get where I am, and you're seeing something on Facebook, and you want to tell me that you got this figured out.
Yeah.
But then as Christians and in church work, on top of that, we have the evil one who wants to deceive and lie and destroy and accuse. And
Kill.
so
Yeah.
that just makes bringing people to God very complicated. And if you look at all the leaders in the Bible, they all face the challenge of people and leaders rebelling against them, and the people rebelling against them. And
Yeah.
I think I didn't anticipate that when I started out. So I sure had comments like Steve had about
Yeah.
could my preaching be more deep? I kind of got to a point where it's like I felt like God was telling me what to say. I tried my very best, always trying to work to learn, but in a sense, I got to a point where I said, I'm doing this message for God. And that helped somewhat with that. But it really is an odd kind of job because of the impact of the evil one and the challenge with people. So that's my rant on it. How about John? What's yours?
I agree with you there. Whatever we do unto the Lord. And then if we do it unto the Lord, it doesn't touch us as much. It doesn't bring us out of balance. It can touch us, of course, because and some of us are more dependent on the feedback of others. Some of us are people pleasers. Some of us always want to have unity with everyone, and all of these things, influence our response to those matters. But we have to learn, and I think it's something to be learned. We have to learn to whatever we do unto the Lord. We don't do it for people. We don't do it even for the Lord. We don't do it for something that is called church. We do it for the Lord.
Bill, you were just at a conference this past week.
Yeah.
The speaker asked for a show of hands. Could you go into that for just a minute?
Just was asking about some questions about how are you feeling about life? How are you feeling about your church? And one of the questions asked, and this is in a room of about 1,000 people, how many of you have thought about quitting?
As pastors.
All pastors?
As pastors. And I am, and even if I felt that way, I wouldn't have put my hand up in front of all these other pastors because I know a lot of them, I was shocked, literally, like I'm going to say 5%, 7% of the room put their hand up. That, right now they're thinking about quitting their ministry. So
it's a unique job. Hey, we're going to wrap up this session, and I think the other thing, just I was reflecting on was what Steve talked about. Boy, I wish that book was developed that would show
Yeah.
that. Um, but the other piece of it is if you're a speaker, it's a work of art. It's a work of the spirit in you, the spirit, the scriptures, your personality, but in many ways, it's your work of art. It's performance art that you do. And,
Yeah.
I've had times where, someone would go, "Did you know you mispronounced this word?"
Yeah.
When you talked for 26, 27 minutes and it just was so deflating, because if you've done a work of art, if someone goes, "No, I don't like that. That's not very good." It is deflating. And,
Yeah.
I think one of the things you've got to learn if you're in ministry long enough is just how do you deal with the discouragement, the disappointment, in all the areas, um, with speaking and with staff. So many of you might be listening to this today and going, "Well, if I just had more staff, that would solve the problems." We all
No.
would say, "No, that
No.
doesn't solve the problems."
Just
And
different
and
problems.
if you want staff, I've got some I'd give to you. I'd even pay for them to leave right now.
Yeah.
And that many of the staff would pay me to leave.
Yeah. Right.
Um, so so these are some of the challenges. And you know what? We kind of go, "Well, how do you solve it?" I don't think you solve it. I think you endure it. So one way that we've helped each other is by being friends that could
Hmm.
commiserate with each other and spur one another on to more love and good deeds. Hey,
Amen.
thanks for listening today. We're going to pick this topic up again and hear from John about his thoughts.
Thanks for listening or watching. We would love to hear your questions.